do you think we've seen the last of Russell Wilson?
Honestly, I hope we have. And I say that because I just looking at him and his career, his legacy, like you talked about, if ever there was somebody who played himself out of a Hall of Fame, it's Russell Wilson.
It's a crazy thought, but had Russell Wilson just retired after the 2021 season, he probably would have been better off. Through his first 10 seasons as a Seattle Seahawk, Wilson was a constant winner who consistently ranked as a top 5 quarterback for the majority of his career. He made one All-Pro team, went to 9 Pro Bowls, threw for over 30 touchdowns in 5 different seasons, and of course a Super Bowl champion in 2013. He was no doubt on his way to the Hall of Fame. After 2021, this is where Russ ranked all-time after a quarterback's first 10 seasons. 2nd in touchdown passes, 6th in passing yards, 2nd in passer rating, 2nd in wins, tied for 1st and 4th quarter comebacks, and tied for 1st in game-winning drives. He could have called it a career here, and he would have gone down as one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, with the one blemish on his resume being the goal line interception. However, Russell was barely 33 years old after his final season in Seattle, and with him still playing at a high level, he obviously had no thoughts of retirement. By this point, his reputation was as good as it gets. Durable, reliable, motivator, and a winning player. There were a couple of Richard Sherman quotes that may have led us to believe Russell Wilson was not the greatest teammate, but that's just one side of the story. Wilson, to no surprise, took the high road and had nothing but nice things to say about Sherman in their first battle against each other since Sherman's departure. 2021 was Wilson's first losing season in Seattle. It was also the first time he had been injured, as he missed 3 games with a fractured middle finger. Wilson did have a no-trade clause in his contract, but the writing was on the wall that a move could happen. A year prior, in 2021, Russell did something that was very uncharacteristic and threw some shade at his offensive linemen and the organization for having to endure so many sacks. His agent also came out and said Wilson would waive his no-trade clause if he were traded to either Dallas, Las Vegas, New Orleans, or Chicago. With the team consistently falling short and the roster overhauls in recent years, it made sense for both parties to go in a different direction. So on March 8th, 2022, Wilson was traded to Denver for one of the largest hauls in NFL history, including 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks. Although Denver was not on the list of teams released by his agent, the opportunity to go there was intriguing. They had great young talent, a new offensive mind at head coach, and they would sign Wilson to a 5-year, $245 million extension. I think that last part would persuade most people. In a division that had Derek Carr, Patrick Mahomes, and Justin Herbert, you had to fight fire with fire. At the time, the overwhelming consensus was that the Broncos had done exactly what they needed to do in order to compete in the AFC West. The expectations were high from the jump, with Denver's win projection placed at 10, and their odds to win the Super Bowl being the 8th best in the NFL. From the opening game, though, you could see flaws, whether it was a struggling offense or horrific clock management by Nathaniel Hackett in his head coaching debut. And to make it worse, Wilson took the loss to his former team in his former home stadium. After a 2-2 start, Denver hosted Matt Ryan and the Colts on Thursday Night Football, a game that would go down as maybe the most unwatchable primetime game of the past 10 years. The 2 veteran quarterbacks each had 2 interceptions, took 11 sacks combined, and Denver was 2 for 15 on 3rd down. After over 57 minutes without a touchdown being scored, Denver could have played for the tie, but opted to go for it from the Colts' 5-yard line. Wilson's end zone shot was broken up by Stephon Gilmore, and the Colts escaped with a very ugly win. To make matters worse, Wilson missed a wide-open slant to KJ Hamler that would have won them the game. Maybe Wilson was having some PTSD, as the route concept was eerily similar to the infamous goal line pass that cost him a Super Bowl title 8 years earlier, but by this point everybody knew it was time to panic about the Broncos. There was no more room for excuses of a new head coach, new playbook, or new quarterback. We were over a month in and this offense showed no signs of improvement, although I must say the memes of Russell Wilson were hilarious on NFL Twitter around this time.
Let's ride. Broncos country. Let's ride.
Rather than using this as an opportunity to look themselves in the mirror and get their season back on track, Denver ended up losing 7 of their next 8 games. Wilson would miss 2 games with separate injuries, but the Broncos let him finish out the season going 5-12 overall. This was the least amount of wins he would ever have in his 11-year career to that point, and set a number of career lows in plenty of passing categories. Things like passer rating, touchdown percentage, completion percentage, success rate, quarterback rating, and sacks were all the worst of his career. The blame had to go somewhere, and it was not going to be the guy they just handed $165 million guaranteed to. So Nathaniel Hackett was fired before even completing a full season. Hackett was objectively not a good head coach, but it doesn't mean Russell Wilson was absolved from blame. The quarterback did take accountability and did assure Broncos country that they were going to turn this around. A lot was going to depend on their next head coach, but it did help that Russ looked more like himself in the final 2 games that season after Hackett was fired. But then again, 2-game sample size. On January 31st of 2023, we saw our first coach trade since Bruce Arians in 2019. The Saints traded Sean Payton to Denver in exchange for a 1st and 2nd round pick, while giving up a 3rd round pick of their own. A steep price for sure, especially for a coach, but Payton was more than just a coach. He was an elite play caller, a culture changer, and a winner. Payton signed a 5-year deal worth around $18 million per year to come out of retirement and coach the Broncos. And possibly the biggest beneficiary of this was Russell Wilson. Right away, the comparisons were made between Russell Wilson and Drew Brees, whether it was the height, the pretty deep ball, or the Hall of Fame resume. Payton publicly stated he saw no physical decline in Wilson's abilities and was confident that he would resemble more of his successful 2021 self rather than the disappointing 2022 version. Even before their first regular season game together, the relationship got off to a bit of an awkward start with an article released on September 5th of 2023. It was reported that Sean Payton told Russell Wilson, quote, "Will you effing stop kissing all the babies? You're not running for public office." It also came out that Payton would not allow Wilson to have his own personal coaches in the Broncos facility. It was a luxury they granted Wilson when coming over in 2022, but they did take this away from him around the time Nathaniel Hackett was fired last year. With all of that seemingly behind them, it was time to focus on football. Payton, who had never had a season below 7 wins in 15 seasons of coaching, was all but guaranteed to raise the floor of this team coming off of a 5-win season. Through the first 6 games, however, the Broncos were 1-5 and staring yet another lost season square in the face. And while our initial instinct is to look to Russell Wilson, it's hard to throw majority of the blame in his direction. After all, the Broncos defense was allowing 33 points per game on average through the first 6 games, including the game at Miami when the Dolphins scored 70 points. Russell's numbers were respectable, completing 66% of his passes with 12 touchdowns and 6 total turnovers. Nothing spectacular, but clearly not horrible either. After another ugly Thursday Night Football loss where Wilson had under 100 yards passing and 2 turnovers versus the Chiefs, the Broncos would have 10 days to regroup and try to turn their season around. From weeks 7 through 14, Denver only lost 1 game. They were able to rebound and win 6 of their next 7 games and get back over 500. I can confidently say that this stretch right here was the closest we've seen of prime Russell Wilson since leaving Seattle. After falling to 7-8 in a crushing home loss to New England, the Broncos organization had a tough decision to make. They weren't technically eliminated from the playoffs, but would have needed a miracle in the final 2 weeks remaining. According to Next Gen Stats, they had about an 8% chance of making the postseason. With Wilson having a $37 million injury guarantee that could become guaranteed in the offseason, the team decided to be cautious and bench the 35-year-old veteran for the rest of the season. The benching, while it could have been viewed as strictly financial, it was a solid indicator that Denver was going to move off of him during the 2024 offseason. He would finish 2023 at 7-8 in 15 starts, 3,070 passing yards, 26 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, a 98 passer rating, and added 3 rushing touchdowns. While Wilson's stats did look much better, the Broncos still struggled mightily in the red zone and specifically in goal-to-go situations. Denver had the 30th ranked offense in that department, and ever since he left the Seahawks, red zone efficiency was something Wilson really struggled with, only ranking in the top half of the league once in 4 years. Heading into the 2024 offseason, we knew that there was a possibility of the Broncos ending the Russell Wilson era just 2 years into his 5-year deal. However, However, it wouldn't be that easy. Had Denver decided to release him that offseason, they would accumulate $85 million in dead cap over the next 2 seasons, which to no surprise was the NFL record for the largest dead cap hit in league history. Essentially, the Broncos were saying, we'd rather sink almost a quarter of our salary cap than have you back on this roster for another year. Probably a tough pill to swallow for a guy who just 2 years prior was viewed as an elite quarterback, and on March 4th of 2024, the Broncos outright released Russell Wilson. A guy they traded 4 premium draft picks for in 2022 was entirely off the roster just 2 off seasons later. In total, Wilson's record as the Broncos starter was 11-19. He was sacked 100 times in 30 starts and failed to make the playoffs in either season. Looking outwards, Nathaniel Hackett was one of the worst coaches we've ever seen, so that didn't really help. In both seasons, the Broncos offensive line underperformed, facing pressure rates of 39.4% in 2022 and 45.9% in 2023. Both of those numbers were higher than the league average. And despite Wilson and the offense improving in 2023 when Sean Payton arrived, the same cannot be said about the Broncos defense. Denver's defense went from a respectable 14th in points allowed in 2022 all the way down to 27th in points allowed in 2023. So while Wilson admittedly could have played better in his own right, it would be unfair to entirely blame him for the 11-19 record he had in Denver. But in hindsight, Sean Payton's decision to move off of Wilson and draft Bo Nix paid off, as it resulted in a playoff appearance during his rookie season in 2024. And as of today, the Broncos are 6-2 and look pretty good. As for Wilson's next stop, he took his talents to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, since Denver was already paying Wilson a guaranteed $37 million, he was able to take a veteran minimum contract with Pittsburgh and still make close to $40 million that year. Upon signing, it seemed as if Pittsburgh was a great place for Wilson to land. They had continuity, a solid roster, and just came off of a 10-win season, with Kenny Pickett, Mitch Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph as their quarterbacks. As for Pickett, he was traded just 5 days after the Wilson signing, meaning that he had a clear path to being the team's quarterback 1. But a day later came the Justin Fields trade, where Pittsburgh traded a 6th-round pick to bring in the former Bears' 1st-round quarterback. Based on Wilson's quotes, it didn't seem like he was blindsided by the Fields trade, quite the opposite actually. Apparently the two had been texting about it before it even happened. For Russell, his career in Pittsburgh got off to a rough start as he injured his calf on the first day of training camp while pushing a sled. The injury, described as calf tightness, kept him out for the first couple weeks of training camp, and he had to sit out the opening preseason game. This of course gave Justin Fields the upper hand, becoming more familiar with Arthur Smith's offense and being viewed as a better scheme fit compared to Wilson. However, Wilson did get back for the final 2 preseason games and actually won the starting job, as it was announced on August 28th. All he had to do was make it to week 1 unscathed, but unfortunately that's not how it went. Just a few days before the opener, Wilson suffered a setback with the same calf injury that had lingered all summer. Wilson had always been durable throughout his career, but at this point, closing in on 36 years old, the injuries were starting to get to him a bit. Justin Fields would start the first 6 games of the 2024 season and had the Steelers at a 4-2 record. Wilson was healthy enough to be listed as the emergency quarterback in week 5 and made active for the first time in week 6. It was safe to assume that with Pittsburgh winning games, they took some extra time to ensure Wilson was 100% healthy before putting him back on the field. They had the luxury of waiting, with Fields playing well enough to have the team at 4-2. But after 6 games, the Steelers' offense ranked 26th in the NFL and 28th in passing yards per game. The coaching staff believed there was another level they can get the offense to with Wilson, so they made the decision to start him in week 7 on Sunday Night Football. From weeks 7 through 14, this decision looked brilliant. Pittsburgh went 6-1 over that span, averaging 27 offensive points per game. The immediate return was great, with Russell Wilson's popular moon ball being a great fit for George Pickens and Calvin Austin. The team had an identity of being a run-heavy offense that can also beat you over the top, and for most of that year, they led the NFL in time of possession, along with a top 10 defense that was tied for the most takeaways in the NFL. But over their 4 final regular season games, the Steelers went winless. Some of that coincided with George Pickens missing 3 games due to a hamstring injury, or the fact that they played some elite teams during that stretch, as Mike Tomlin alluded to. Over the 4-game losing streak, Wilson and the offense failed to score over 17 points in a single contest, and choked choked away their division lead despite starting out the year 10-3. Fortunately, their 10-7 final record was enough to secure a wildcard spot. But by that point, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single Steelers fan that had any faith left in this team. Russell Wilson would still get to play in his first playoff game in 4 years, but just like the one in 2020, this one did not go his way either. The 13-win Ravens were their matchup, and you could see the talent gap between the two teams right away. Baltimore jumped out to a 21-0 halftime lead, Derrick Henry went crazy, Lamar was super efficient, and the Steelers' offense did not cross midfield until the second half. They tried to mount a second half comeback, scoring 2 touchdowns in the third quarter, but there was never really a real threat of Baltimore losing that game. To summarize the Steelers' offense, they finished 27th in passing, never scored an opening touchdown in the 18 games they played that year, and they were 29th in red zone touchdown percentage. They had minimal issues putting away very bad teams, but Russell Wilson was a disastrous 1-5 against teams with a winning record. Around mid-December, it seemed as if the 36-year-old quarterback had found a new home, a place where he could have finished out his career alongside a winning head coach. Ironically, the Steelers are saying the same thing about Aaron Rodgers 1 year later. But just in a span of 5 games, it feels like all of that changed. Wilson came out and said he wants to remain with Pittsburgh, claiming he loved it here and they were a great football team, but ultimately that decision was not up to him. If you're looking at it from the Steelers' perspective, you haven't won a playoff game in 7 years, you couldn't compete with good teams that season, and you just saw an offensive scoring drought that was so bad that the Steelers had not done it since 1969. And while his 2024 production was solid, especially for a league minimum contract, it was now going to be a larger commitment if they wanted him back. During the offseason, Wilson had talks with Pittsburgh and meetings with the Browns and the Giants. Returning to the Steelers was always a possibility, but they essentially treated Wilson as a side piece and clearly wanted Aaron Rodgers more. There were other insider reports speculating that the relationship between Wilson and the Steelers had been fractured, or he and the offensive coordinator Arthur Smith butted heads over play calling. It took a couple of weeks into free agency, but Wilson signed with the New York Giants for a 1-year, $10.5 million deal, fully guaranteed. Wilson's agreement with the Giants came at an odd time, considering Jameis Winston had just signed there a few days prior. At minimum, Wilson would have to battle with the former first overall pick, and there was always a possibility of the Giants taking a quarterback in the draft a month later. The presumption was Russ would be the quarterback 1 for New York, and Jameis Winston would be the quarterback 2. But once the Giants traded back up in the first round for Jackson Dart, the situation became a whole lot less certain. While the Giants were adamant that Russell Wilson would remain the team's starting quarterback heading into week 1, it significantly shortened his leash if things went off the rails in the first few weeks of the season. Teams will preach patience when grooming a first-round quarterback, especially in the offseason, but that's way easier said than done. Look at guys like Josh Allen, Drake May, and Josh Rosen. They were thrown into the fire quicker than their teams wanted them to be, probably. Unlike last year in Pittsburgh, Wilson would have to remain healthy to make a week 1 start, and luckily he did this time. But breathing right down his neck was Jackson Dart, who was somewhat surprisingly named the team's quarterback 2 over Jameis Winston after an impressive preseason. Brian Daboll still fulfilled his promise, and Russell Wilson was the starter in week 1 at Washington. It got off to a rough start with the Giants offense not finding the end zone all day. Wilson failed to complete even half of his passes, despite only averaging 4.5 air yards per attempt. In week 2, that all changed. Wilson had his highest passing yards total in almost 8 years, throwing for 450 yards and 3 touchdowns. Matt Eberflus and the monstrosity known as the 2025 Cowboys defense allowed Wilson to throw for a ridiculous 11 yards per attempt, but even that was still not enough to win. The Giants defense was even worse, allowing 37 points, and the Giants fell to 0-2. Hard to blame the quarterback, even though Wilson did throw a horrendous game-losing interception in overtime. Sitting at 0-2 and a Giants regime that is very much on the hot seat meant that wins would have to happen fast, or else the call for Jackson Dart was coming sooner than later. All eyes were on New York in week 3. They were 0-2 and on an island game against the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. It went pretty horribly. 2 bad-looking interceptions and a goal-to-go situation late in the game that included 3 throwaways out of bounds, and one of those being on 4th down. It was inexcusable, and Giants fans were fed up and chanting for their first-round pick to get on the field. The floodgates had completely opened, and with Brian Daboll's back against the wall, starting out 0-3, he was left with no other their choice. Jackson Dart was named the starter for Week 4 and Russell Wilson was sent to the bench. Since that time, Wilson has only played 4 snaps and attempted 2 passes that fell incomplete. He still remains on a 1-year deal with the Giants, but given the quarterback injuries around the league, you figured that some team out there would want Russell Wilson. But according to Diana Rossini, even the Bengals, who are missing Joe Burrow for multiple months, didn't even bother on checking the availability of Wilson. So that's where we stand today. Year 14, and it looks like Russell Wilson is no longer wanted as a starter by any of the 32 NFL teams. But has his reputation been so tarnished over the past 4 years that it jeopardized his chances of making the Pro Football Hall of Fame? Well, when you look at history, it suggests that Wilson will get in. There is no quarterback in NFL history to throw for more than 350 touchdowns and not get inducted. The only one right now is Eli Manning, but there's still a good chance he's going to get in. There are some other names that are not eligible yet, but chances are they'll get in as well. Although Matt Ryan is pretty interesting. I don't know about that one. There have been only 15 quarterbacks to surpass 47,000 career passing yards. Russell Wilson is just 79 yards away from 47,000, so we'll just round up and make it easier. Out of those 15 quarterbacks, just 6 have been Hall of Fame eligible so far, but all 6 have been inducted. Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco seem to be the ones on the cusp, but I would still take Wilson's career over both of them. There have been 21 quarterbacks in history to start in multiple Super Bowls. So far, 15 of the 21 have been Hall of Fame eligible, and 13 of the 15 have made it to the Hall of Fame. The 2 that weren't were Jim Plunkett and Joe Theismann. Wilson's resume is significantly better than both of them. And lastly, there have been 19 different quarterbacks to win at least 9 different playoff starts in their career. Russell Wilson is one of those 19. Out of the 19, 12 have been Hall of Fame eligible, and 11 of the 12 have made it. Donovan McNabb is the one who has not made it yet. Based on his career accolades and statistics, I still believe Russell Wilson is going to make the Hall of Fame. It may not be on the first ballot like we all anticipated just a few years ago, but he should get in nonetheless. And truthfully, his numbers over the past 4 years haven't been the worst in the world. He's still averaging 3,600 passing yards, 22 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, over a 17-game average from 2022 to 2025. I think with Russ, it gets overemphasized because of all the corny things he's done over the past few years, but once again, it's still overemphasized. I still think at heart he's a good guy and does a lot for the community. The goal line interception that cost him a second Super Bowl, that I can't defend, although you really have to question the coaching more than anything. That'll do it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I will talk to you guys next time.